And we're live back with NX Office Hours again on this Tuesday instead. We usually do these on Monday, or at least we did the last one on a Monday. But since we had a holiday in the U.S. yesterday, we're pushing it back one day. But we're still gonna keep them going. See how they have some people in the chat room there, so that's pretty cool. If you haven't noticed already, I'll see if I can get this point right. Right there. Brandon T. Roberts on Twitter. And Yuri, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Yuri. You can see my Twitter handle. I'm not that good at pointing down here. And yeah, just started working at Narwhal in January and working on NX Cloud, and a couple of stuff. So happy to be in the show.
Cool. And of course, NX, one of the big things about NX that we're doing right now is NX Cloud. So if you get a chance to look at that, go check out at nx.app and check out nx.cloud, which will help you build and test things a lot faster. So with that part out of the way, I guess we'll go ahead and get into some questions. And these are questions like that we've gotten since the last office hours, or things that have come up, recently that were good topics to cover. And one of the first ones, and you could talk about this one, and short here, was how do I include assets and libraries? And you actually did a video about this. So you want to talk about like how can we include assets and libraries using NX?
Yeah, sure. Like that was a question which came up a couple of times on Twitter, like people DM'd me, or also I think on our GitHub sometimes on the issues, because like people, when they create NX libraries, they always think about code, like compilable code, TypeScript, whatever, right? JavaScript. And often, however, especially for instance, when you create reusable components, like kind of like style guide libraries, right, where you have like reusable components which make up your layout, your dump, basically components like presentation components, and those often also come with some kind of assets, right? Whether those are images, JSON files, CSS files, whatever, right?
Right.
And so there's
normally you have to like copy those in manually and stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like the Angular CLI has those options, those asset options in the builder, like which is for the app builders. But there isn't really something similar for the libraries, which you have in NX, right? There's the libraries are being like pulled into your application when the application is being compiled. And so what you would have there is not live those assets in that application, but rather have those assets live inside those library folders. And I can try to quickly share my screen just to walk you through. Let's see whether that works.
Okay.
Can you see my screen?
No, not yet. Let's see if we need to split here.
Let me just do it again. Does it work?
No, I'm still just seeing me and you on the screen.
Because I tried, let me see. Oh, yeah, macOS permissions. Probably have to be filled. Yeah, let's do something else. So if you, I mean, you could open up. I can share your link with you.
Okay.
And open it up if you want. Basically, one thing you can do. I published a video about that because rather than explaining it, I thought I might just quickly record a couple-minute video, and I put that up on our Narwhal YouTube channel. So what you can definitely go there, register there. It's the same channel where this current office hour session is being streamed. And you should find a video there, which is basically guiding you through the steps of setting up those assets and libraries. And I just sent Brandon a link to repository. And this is basically the repository, which is also linked in the video. So you should be able to jump here. And what you see, for instance, if you open up that libs folder, which is where the libraries live in NX. Exactly. Then there's that greeter component, and that is basically one of those libraries. And you should also, like, if you open up source, you have that assets folder. And so that's usually the first step. It's very similar to what you have basically when you look at your applications which are being generated with Angular CLI. Now, there is no need to actually have that assets below the source folder. Like, you could even have it at the root folder. You just have to take into account when you go and copy that over during the build, right? Which we'll see in a second.
Right.
Like in general, you could even have just a library just having assets. So you don't really necessarily have to combine them, but maybe you have just a grouping of libraries, and one of them is just having assets like files, images, and stuff. And so this is obviously the first step. You cannot just have this here. And then if you go step back into the source folder again, yeah, exactly, and then into lib, and we should have there in the greeter, we should have a greeter component just to see how we reference the image. If you go to the HTML part, so the template part,
okay,
then you basically see that I'm including here that image, which I basically assume it will be available under /assets and then this greeter is something I place in here in order to basically prefix it with the library which I'm having, right? Because otherwise, if I have multiple libraries in a large monorepo, they might get overwritten, and I want to avoid that.
right.
And so that's the URL where I want to have them live in the application. That's basically using my library. And so the next step which we have to do is if you go back to the annex, to the root folder,
Root here.
and then you open up basically the Angular JSON or workspace JSON. Yeah, this one. Then basically here we have just one application, which is demo app. And here in the middle, you see the assets. Yeah, exactly. And here you basically see, first of all, the first two lines, which are the classic ones, which you have in an Angular application, right, when they get generated, which is usually the fav icon and the assets folder. Mm-hmm. And then you have also that expanded configuration, which you can put in here, which basically, here I'm saying, okay, the input basically for the files being copied should be a libs, greeter, source, assets. And here you can basically specify whatever the path should be. Right now, I'm just copying in everything. Like in the glob, you see like every kind of files, but you could limit that to CSS files. And you could even like say, okay, CSS files should land in this folder, images on the dollar folder. And then the output folder, which is assets greeter, right? So the only downside, if you want here, is that you have to copy that in every app that's actually using your library. And
I see.
One way around that could be like with workspace schematics, right? So we often do have such setup, but we have a workspace schematics that helps you to set this up automatically, and so you don't miss them basically when you have the library in another application.
Right, and then like I said, workspace schematics help you automate some. Like if you have a particular setup you have within your organization or even in your project, that you generate libraries, the same way in a same, like I said, a particular structure. The schematics help you automate that a lot easier. Yeah,
absolutely. Because usually those libraries are very specific to you, how your company works, like how the repository inside your enterprise works. And so therefore you can basically plan them out. And maybe like every library by default should have an assets folder already provisioned. And so that's very easy to automate with workspace schematics inside NX.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I think we'll copy a link to your video here in the chat, and we'll try to get that up on the screen also. But yeah, like I said, the videos are out there on YouTube, right? You just published that recently, right?
Yeah, that was just like last week, I guess. Yeah, quite recently.
Okay. And just for there, you can visit this YouTube URL that I'm showing here to see that video about using assets and libraries. And it's like a full walkthrough, like you just showed here, to help you make that process a lot easier. So yeah, that was, like I said, a good one there. One other thing that we added here was, and this one I think is pretty recently, and that one is talking about like incremental builds, which like incremental builds, if you have like a large application, you got many libraries, things like that. Normally, you would generate these libraries, but your application would still be, I guess, be considered one unit at compilation time. But incremental builds let you kind of break those down into smaller pieces. So you've done a lot on buildable libraries. So you want to talk about how we can use, where we are with incremental builds and what we've been doing with that?
Yeah, exactly. Like as you mentioned, right now we have different possibilities. So if you generate the library out of the box right now in NX, it's kind of like what you could call a workspace library. So it isn't really meant to be published, for instance, to npm or to be built separately, but rather those libraries are being like imported into the applications. And so what happens is those libraries are being built with the application itself, right? So the application, which under the hood, like the Angular CLI uses the builder, which uses Webpack. And so the source basically is just like kind of sucked into your application and bundled with the application itself. Now, NX already does a good job in terms of like having those affected commands and then having the dependency graph behind the scenes. So in that way, it is able to figure out like which libraries it should build. When you basically start building up one, it will just build those libraries which have been affected in your PR and so on. And so there's a lot of work already going there. What we have seen, however, in really, really large monorepos, you can still have situations where the builds can get slow just because there are so many libraries, or you're doing like cross-refactoring across many libraries. And so therefore, the affected graph will have a lot of them in there. And so combined with the recent cache which we have in NX, right, which also like works together with NX Cloud, which allows you to build things separately. And basically every builded unit basically can be stored in a cache and just retrieved from the cache if nothing has changed in the meanwhile. And so that basically made us think about like what about incremental building, right? So what if you could like have an application which depends on a couple of libraries, and rather than having the application directly depend on source, build those libraries independently. And so the cache would take care about not building them again if nothing has changed, right? And so this is like a working together between the cache that NX has, if you want NX Cloud as well, and also like having the possibility to build libraries independently. So right now you can, in theory, do that. Like if you generate a new library and you added the -- publishable flag, you get basically a library which also has a builder, meaning that you can actually just build that library. Now, usually that's meant for publishing to npm, right? It does like, for instance, for Angular libraries, it does the whole ng packager thing and builds it down and so on. And so in the application itself, you could then depend on that build output. And with incremental builds, what we're trying to do, and this is still kind of experimental, we can share in a demo repository in the live comments, which I will paste in a minute, where Victor actually...
I know people's like incremental builds. It's like, can we do this now?
Yeah, exactly. Like Victor made up a very short example where he tried to play around what is possible right now. So the developer experience is not perfect yet, which is why we didn't yet really push hard on this incremental builds. But we think this is going to be really cool. So we need a couple of adjustments in terms of you might not want to have the full publishable experience because you're not interested in publishing, for instance, but just like in building itself. And also, ng-surf right now doesn't really support basically depending on external libraries. And so that kind of experience has to be optimized as well. So there are a couple of points we want to address, and we are working on that. So maybe basically that -- publishable, we could have another flag that like -- buildable or something like that. We're still kind of thinking about that in order to not confuse people too much, because we don't want to disambiguate them too much. But there might be some like reduced build option for libraries that enables you to have incremental builds.
Yeah, because I know we've at least had some discussions about, like I said, buildable versus publishable libraries, and like what's the difference between the two, whether you're going to build one to ship to npm, or like I said, just use one for incremental builds. So yeah, I think we're working towards like making that more clear as far as when you would need to do one or the other, at least like the process and everything. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think another question was asked: Would you see a future where we have buildable or publishable libraries by default? Because I think that could be something you could define up front, or you define up front if you know you're going to have a large app and you're going to have a lot of libraries, and you want to you have a lot of libraries, and you, like I said, you want to make it as fast as possible and take advantage of that cache, and you can make it easy so that each library that you generate is already publishable by default. Or I guess you could do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Just by setting the configuration, but yeah, it could be out of the box that way too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that would be like the end goal. Like it depends how good the developer experience will be. Because like one thing which is really nice right now in NX is you basically have your application, you like change something in your library, and when that application is being referenced by one of the apps you're currently serving, it will automatically refresh or be rebuilt and so on. And we want to definitely preserve that kind of experience. And so it really depends on that. Like if you are able to make buildable libraries, the developer experience as good as it is right now, then definitely that could be an option where you can basically set that on by default. And so you would have that builder and you could just like opt in and have everything buildable. It might differ a bit like with the current -- publishable flag, because that has a lot more, right? Like if you run, for instance, ng packager on a large library or on a library, for instance, with multiple entry points or secondary entry points, then that can take up quite a long time. And we definitely don't want to have that, right? The cache will take, of course, some of that time away if you didn't change anything. But if you change something, then again, you would have to wait. And we don't want to increase the time you have to wait, but rather reduce it. And so we might have like a builder which is not that advanced. So it does kind of like if you can think about like an advanced TypeScript builder, basically. Something like that. So like we're still kind of figuring that out and trying experiment around with it.
Yep, because like at the end of the day, we know that it's technically possible, but we still want the developer experience to be good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Using it. So that kind of leads into another question that we had was, can I use NX only for reusable libraries? Like out of the box, we have libraries and applications, and or you can just create an empty. Yeah, you can. I think the answer to here is you can create like an empty workspace and not generate empty workspace and only have your applications, your application libraries folder, and only generate libraries and use those or make those publishable, and those be the only things in your workspace. So yeah, I think you can use NX for reusable libraries in that way and kind of make that, like I said, we're working on this story also for like open source projects where they only have libraries, and maybe they have an app, maybe they don't. They only have tests for those. So I think it provides the support to do that also. Yeah. So let's see. Of course,
there's also related, just because what comes to my mind right now, like related to that. We have in 9.4.0, which is currently beta, which we published on NPM, I think today or yesterday. We also have now the options because right now in NX, you always have like apps and libs. And that might not be suitable if you have like an open source library where you have like different packages. Like you don't maybe want to have that apps and libs separation, which might make sense in a monorepo like in the classic one. And so in 9.4, we have the option that you can also change the name. So you could have like just one packages folder, which contains all your libraries, and maybe like a demo folder, which contains the app. And so that will like allows to much more flexibility. And so therefore it could be even more suited for having that experience basically with just having a repository for public libraries, for reusable libraries.
Yeah, for sure. Like you said, we use, like I said, apps and libs, and I know like Angular uses packages for their folder, like, and at least in NGRX project, we use modules for where our libraries live. So being able to customize that, I think that's been a long requested feature, being able to customize where those libraries and applications actually go. So like I said, it gives a lot more flexibility there. So let's go to the next question that we have here is, and I think this one kind of leads into like some of the community support or that we've kind of built up. But the question is, what are plans for Electron.js support in NX, and what are the best practices you might recommend for it? And I would say that the plan, I guess we don't have any current plans for Electron.js support in NX directly. But the good thing about NX is that we have a plugin system that you can generate a plugin. You can generate the whole plugin architecture or generate a new project for a plugin that'll give you builders, migration schematics, and you can build that integration with Electron in that as a community plugin. And we have a community plugins page that you can, we have a community plugins page that shows these plugins that have been developed. And I'll bring it up here in a second. These community plugins, this is the right one. So here's our community page. And we show, zoom in here a little bit. We show you a lot more information about how you can get involved as far as community is concerned with NX. Or we have GitHub, Slack channel, like office hours as we're doing today, Twitter, and even our NX newsletter. And then we've scroll down here, we have our community plugins, and we have our, like I said, there are two types of plugins within, or two main types of plugins within NX. The core NX plugins that we maintain from the Narwhal team. And then there's the community plugins that we've looked at and, have looked over and improved them to, or vetted them to, that they, can be in the directory that we show when you look for plugins within NX. And as you can see, we already have, we have what, 14 or 11 plugins here already. So it's pretty, and we also have a guide that shows you, how to create a plugin with NX. So if you wanted to build a plugin, like I said, around Electron and use that, there's the tooling and infrastructure there through the NX plugins that let you do that. So we can extend, like I said, you can extend the ecosystem of NX in that way also. All right, so I think we covered that one pretty good. And I think we're getting a lot more traction with NX, or with NX plugins from, like I said, community members that are going out there building different, or solving different solutions with that. So it's pretty cool to see. Let's see if we have any. I'm going to check the comments while we're here. And one question is, are we considering moving NGRX platform to NX? And the answer is yes, we are considering that. There's actually a pull request out there now. You're going to put me on the spot. But yes, we have a PR out there on the NX repo now, or NGRX repo now. It means it's there, you can go see it. And I'll bring the question up here. That you can go see that how we're planning on testing out NX for our build and test infrastructure. Because it's, like I said, it'll help us make it better for other people who want to use NX for open source projects. And no better way to do that than throw it at some real projects. And there are some other libraries that have already migrated to using NX for their packages, such as Scully and ones from, I'm not sure if Akita is using them directly, but I know
but I think
one of those packages that they offer is.
Exactly, yeah.
So yeah, let's go to our next question. Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and answer this because I clicked on it here. What are the difference between an NX plugin and an Angular schematic? And I guess I'll start out here and you can jump in. As far as the underlying technology goes, they both use the same libraries underneath. And NX plugin is more of a packaged combination of tooling and infrastructure around. It's not just about NX plugin is not just a schematic. It's a combination of schematics, migrations, and end-to-end tests for your plugin, and integrates, makes it so you can build like the infrastructure around that plugin. So a plugin could do many things that, like I said, schematics, builders, there's other things, schematics, builders, and migrations. And like I said, the tests and tooling around those. So you can have multiple schematics within an NX plugin, or you just have a single one. So it gives you a lot more flexibility than Angular schematic by itself.
Yeah, I see it kind of like as NX is right now. If you want to wrap an Angular app like in that with that NX tooling, like the NX plugins are kind of like that tooling wrap around schematics and builders, as you mentioned, right? With, as you said, like tests set up already, like, or I think there are also kind of some like links to basically references to our utilities which you use inside NX or NX repository as well, which like help you with reading, like manipulating ASTs, reading files from the local workspace, and so on. Just kind of like integrated into what NX gives as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there are, like I said, a lot of utility library or utility functions within an RL workspace package itself that, like I said, those things that you're going to need for schematics anyway that you don't wouldn't normally have or that you'd have to keep writing from scratch. So those things are provided for you out of the box. Okay, so let's see. Our next question is about organization. What's recommended way to organize libraries to handle multiple applications, projects, and platforms?
I think we have some suggestions in our book, right? Which is like about monorepos, something like that, which gives some kind of suggestions. I also personally really like Manfred Steyer's recent book, which he has, like monorepos or enterprise monorepos, something like that. You can just like Google it with Manfred Steyer and we'll find it. He goes more into the domain-driven development kind of concept, right? Where you have like domains and you basically nest the libraries under those domains. Like you have multiple subfolders within that NX libs folder as well. So I think that's a very interesting way and very suitable way for basically organizing libraries. But that's more like for different kind of application projects, not necessarily platforms. So
yeah, I think yeah, like you said, he has I believe it's an ebook out there. I think I recently saw him talk about that at NG Vikings, which was these past 2 days. And I think I have a link to it here. I'm going to bring it up here. So yeah, Manfred definitely is even has NX in the title there. So so get some pub for him and pub for us. But like you said, this is a good way to use these patterns to implement an organization with your libraries. And like I said, NX provides a way to give you the tooling and infrastructure around doing that.
Yeah, this is one interesting approach. I think in general, like you can just give kind of like recommendations, what are patterns that might work. But what I've seen so far, also like working with our clients at Narwhal, is that the structure often very strongly depends on the kind of organization, right? So this is a bit to do with like, that's also where domain-driven concepts come in, right? Which is the whole concept around like there are books that large around those concepts, how you structure applications, how you separate them, like how you deal with dependencies between them. So that's like answering, there's no real true answer. There's just like kind of recommendations which you can give. And he does a pretty good job at that, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, let's see what we have. Of course, if you have any questions in the chat room while we're on office hours, please feel free to ask those. We already got some good questions so far. And I'll put this up here. So if you have questions on Twitter, you can ask them using the #NX hashtag for this one. And we'll try to answer those there. Or we'll try to bring those in and see if we can answer them during these office hours. If we don't get to them this time, then we'll answer them on a future session or through one of our other channels. So this one is, I guess this was a combination. There's like an NGRX combination NX question. And how do you use dialogues and NGRX effects in combination with the rules around data access libraries? And I'll let you, I think you have more experience with like this structure around data access libraries. And then I guess I can throw in my part about the NGRX using it in that way.
Regarding the structuring here,
yeah, because like what we recommend, like in the book is you have data access libraries and feature libraries or feature shells.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know that one issue with using those with NGRX is that if you're, let's say you have a component that you want to open in a dialog inside an effect, and that dialog may live in your feature, and then you have your effects that may live in a data access library, and but then your feature depends on the data access library. So you get into this like scenario where you could have a circular dependency to where your effect needs the component, but then your feature needs the state or the data access from the library. And what I recommend here is that if that component is if you need to use that component in the both of those places, like in the effects that are in the data access library and in the feature, then you would break that component into a separate library because you're effectively sharing it between two things. Because the data access or the libraries in general only expose like a public API for those things that are in that library. And since we don't recommend like deep imports into those libraries, it helps you avoid those like circular dependencies in that place. You have to create a new reference point for both the library and the data access, or the feature library and the data access library, to depend on that particular component. Yeah, so I think, let me look here. I'm going to check the Twitters real quick. See if we got any new questions there. Okay. Let's see.
Yeah, I see someone on the chat also mentions, I think it's called NStudio XPlat or something like that. I know Nathan Walker is basically working on, or for a couple of years already, they have kind of like a wraparound NX, or they provide kind of schematics. Yeah, exactly. Because that's kind of referring to the question which we had before, right? That also, like, they have some schematics which work very well if you want to do cross-platform organization of libraries. Like I know they have some support for native script, I think, and maybe even for Electron. It's while I checked it last, so but that could be a good way, a good point to go to.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, it's been a while since I looked at it, but when I did look at it before, like I said, it was that multiple or multi-platform. It was basically built on top of what NX does and gave you tooling around building for multiple platforms in that way.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's see, let me scroll through here. Maybe I'll see if I didn't miss anything here. Bring this one up here. And I think this one was kind of discussed in the chat room, but what's best practice for updating a core library? Updating a major bump like Angular that many apps depend on. Is there incremental way to do this? And in this particular, or for this particular question, they're using, since we use a single version approach in the monorepo, you're only going to have one version of each dependency in there at one point in time. So if you're wanting to upgrade your version of Angular, let's say you're on version 7 now or version 8, then you're not going to have a version 8 and a version 9 of Angular within your monorepo. You would have to make the steps. You have to move everybody along, right? You have to move everybody along at the same pace, because otherwise it's going to become more difficult down the road, or it's going to just become more difficult to do if you have those separate versions within there. Because of course, with the way Angular works, it expects all your packages to be a specific version, and if you try to mix those, then your dependency injection could stop working correctly because it has like different versions of metadata. But in general, I'll say like I said, you want to have one version so that every packet, every application, every library is being upgraded at the same time. So that's one of those things where it's to your advantage to make sure that you're staying up to date so that you don't, like I said, don't get too far behind.
Yeah. There's also an interesting part of NX there, like, because usually what NX gives you is like it sits on top of the Angular CLI, right? So it also has like that ng update command baked in, which will automatically like migrate you to the next version. What we do also, of course, is like if you do an ng update, we not only upgrade Angular, for instance, or whatever you're using in the workspace, but rather also like whatever NX, basically, like whatever changed in NX in the meantime. So we have like migration scripts for NX as well. And what's interesting is like if you have a large monorepo, like ng update might be difficult sometimes because it's kind of like you create a PR, like you create a different branch, you do the upgrade. It might take a couple of days and then you merge it in, right? But you might still have like other PRs open which didn't yet get like run through that schematic because like they didn't run this code schematic changes which ng update did because you did that on your own branch, right? And so in NX, we also have, and that's something you could try out the next time, we have the NX migrate command, which is similar to the ng update command, but what it does is basically it goes in multiple steps. So it gives you more control. So what it does is first it like scans through your repository, like through your workspace, and basically determines what needs to be upgraded, like what schematics have to be run. Then it basically changes your package.json without doing any installs, and so you can go basically inspect your package.json, make adjustments as you go, and then you actually run those schematics. And the schematics are then run from a file that's being generated by NX inside your workspace. And so that allows you to even check that file into your repository. And so other people, like in different branches, can again run basically that schematics file, and so also update basically their code, which they might have already written and you didn't get them because they were basically in a different branch. So that's also a good opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, like you said, Angular CLI is one way to update, and even the separate NX CLI has a migration or a way to migrate if you're just using we'll call it a vanilla workspace that you didn't preset to Angular, and you're using the NX CLI instead of
exactly
the Angular CLI, because it has support for all the other, of course, all the commands that you would normally use within an Angular CLI, but you get that caching. You get the caching, and like I said, the other things built in that we talked about before. So I'll bring up this question because I know we've already talked about this one. This is probably going back to the how about narwhal/NX, and whether we talked about the custom layouts as far as the folder structure goes. And I will bring up the link to that repo that you mentioned earlier in the bring up that link that you mentioned earlier about the custom layouts with NX here. Like I said, Victor put this together where we have the NX. We have our, as far as the configuration files, those are still the same. This is just a workspace that uses the NX CLI on its own. So we still have workspace.json and our NX.json, but you'll notice there are no apps and libs in this particular repo because you can use a custom layout here. We're going to the NX.json file, and as you can see, for when this rolls out in 9.4, or if you want to go out and test it now with the 9.40 beta, you can set what the workspace layout should be, where as far as where your apps can go under one directory and your libs can go under that same directory. So you can put everything in one place. And if we go into the packages folder here, we can see we have our Angular application. And then we have a separate UI library that's still all in one place, or all under this packages folder. So that's a long way of saying, yes, we needed this so that we can look at building NX with NX at some point. But like this was the first step in the process of making that work. Because like I said, I'll just bring up the NX repo here.
The whole point basically was like we were like it all started out like this. So we were frustrated by how slow like the end-to-end tests are, like how slow the builds are, and so on. So basically, we created like the local caching. Then we weren't satisfied with that. We created basically NX Cloud. We weren't satisfied with that, and now we need to basically find a way to self-host basically our own repository. So that's how it originally started.
It's good. Yeah, it's like the best version of dog fooding, right?
Exactly.
You have a problem, and then you build a solution to that problem. Then you use that for a while until it no longer serves your needs, and then you build some more tooling around that. So yeah, it's kind of, I'll say the same thing has applied here. Like I said, we have in our structure, we have, like I said, end-to-end tests and the packages folder, which all of our core NX plugins live today, and we're using, like I said, using more custom scripts to build all these packages today. But yeah, once we're gonna go like full circle, we're gonna have NX packages built with NX, and then we're gonna get to take advantage of that caching and everything, just like everybody else does. But we had to feel the pain for it also till we get there. But like I said, it's coming along. And then everybody else will get to take advantage of it too. Which they get it today, but they just don't have the custom layout structure yet. So let's see. Okay, I don't see any questions on Twitter. I think we've gotten through some of these other ones. Let me check the comments here. This is a pretty good one. How to run within NX, how to run Angular schematics like ng-add, Angular material, ng-add, Scully. So if you're using an NX workspace with Angular CLI involved, then the ng commands still work the same way they do today. You can run ng-add Angular material, ng-add Scully. The Angular CLI will handle that for you. Now, if you're using the NX CLI, then there isn't a built-in way to do that today as far as using an NX add, but there is like a quick equivalent of doing that. And if I can, well, the equivalent would be to use, you basically use your package manager the same way you do today. So you'd npm install, Angular material, or you'd npm install, the package for Scully, and then you run the NX generate command, and what the equivalent of the ng-add is for Scully or Angular material. Because in most cases, these are alias to like an init command. So I'm going to type in an example here. And show that. So what you end up with is something like this: NX generate Angular material init, and that would be the equivalent of running the ng-add for the Angular material after you install the package, because that's pretty much what ng-add is today. It's a way to install the package, install that particular package, and the run some setup script or steps that you want, in the while you're doing that. So like I said, and it's a little more predictable in that way. You're adding a package, or we're not trying to like cover up too much of that from you. You're still just adding a package using your package manager and then running the schematic to generate those changes.
Yeah, like as you mentioned, like if you start creating a new workspace with the Angular preset, then you have the Angular JSON, you have the Angular binaries installed, like you have the ng command. So in that workspace, you won't notice any difference really, rather than having like additional commands at disposal, which NX gives you. It's more like if you create a workspace like an empty one, because like you have I don't know, Node in there, you have React in there, you have Next.js in there, and then you add an Angular app later on, then you might not have that immediately available. And so that's when you then basically use these other commands.
Let's see. Next, there's another question. This is from the chat. Is there a way to publish some of the libs in the monorepo with semantic versioning without configuring a lot of things? Maybe a custom npm registry.
So building publishable libraries can be done with a -- publishable flag, right? So that allows you to build them, and then you can just do an npm pack or whatever you need, or npm publish. Regarding semantic versioning, I recently saw, like, we were thinking about that, and I recently saw a chat discussion going on in our community Slack. So you should definitely check, like, that's another hot tip. So you definitely should check out the community Slack, which you can find on our repository. Like, if you go to novel/nx on GitHub, you should see a badge there, which is for community Slack. And if you click on there, you basically can go in there. And if you search there for semantic versioning, I'm pretty sure you should find that thread. Like, there are people which already have something working. I also know that Bram, which I should be on the live chat, or at least was before, I think he was discussing that as well on that thread. So they have already kind of solutions in place. I don't recall whether there is already an NX plugin available or whether it's still kind of a custom setup. So, but definitely register that. And
yeah, I think there were, like I said, I think there were some discussions around, like I said, it's versioning for publishable libraries and kind of automating that as far as that and the deployment process. But I think most of that happened on our Slack channel, and if you can see it here on the GitHub repo, if you go to our GitHub repo at github.com/narwhal/nx, and you can click on the Slack community or NJRX community Slack channel there, and it's open. Anybody can join, and we have different channels of things you can talk about if we want to talk about NX support or upcoming or features or things like that. Plugins. There are a lot of things you can discuss there to get you, like I said, to get you up and running outside of the office hours that we do, or the other ways that we reach out to try to help people use NX. So let's see. I'm trying to see what's next here. Are there? Let's see. I could look at this one. This is kind of a random one. It says, how do you apply the build affected command when master branch is still far behind from the current development branch? And I'll take a stab at this one. You can provide custom, you can provide more configuration to the NX affected command. By default, it uses the master branch and the head of the branch that you're on. But if I can get to the docs here, go to CLI, affected. I'm gonna look at some of the options here. But basically, if you want to, let's say you're running this in CI and you want to run against a particular commit and a particular branch, or a particular branch or commit, or like a combination of those two, then you can provide those as part of the CI process. So you can still use the affected commands to run a specific target, and you could give it a base, whether that be master or your development branch, and then the head would be, like I said, the top of your particular branch that you're working off of. So everything doesn't have to be, you could have a different, like pipeline that's not based off master, or if you're targeting like your development branch that is maybe further along than where master is. So that way you're still only running those affected projects based on those two pieces of information. So that would be one way to use the build affected commands and still, like I said, only build those particular things that you need. And also, if you're, like I said, we're plugging it NX again in cloud. If you're using NX local caching, then even those things that have been built already are not going to get rebuilt because they're just going to be in the local cache. And if you integrate with NX Cloud, then you can span that across your entire team to where you're only building those particular. Everybody on the team is only building the particular packages that have changed, even on their local machine.
Yep. And the interesting thing is also that it does, like, we talk a lot about it related to building, right? Because like that's an operation you do often, but it is also like it works in general with every command which you can execute within NX. So it works with linting, with testing, and especially on CI, that's really like helpful. If you have a PR, you push it up, like CI already runs through basically the whole process of like building, testing, linting, formatting your source code. And then what often happens, like someone suggests a change, right? Because they have to make a fix somewhere. What you do, like you pull down the PR again, like you change that file, you push it up again. Like at that time now, a build will be a lot faster, right? Because like if the CI build is connected with NX Cloud, will just like build that single library which you changed. And so you can basically like save a lot of time related to that. So.
Yep, and just to show that, like the configuration here, all you have to do is, or this comes out of the box now. If you create a new NX workspace, you get local caching by default. So you get build, lint, test, and end-to-end as cacheable operations that you can use to, like I said, only build those only run or cache those commands. So only those things will yep. get cached. And then you don't have to run those again if you haven't made changes to impact those. Let's see. This is a good one. I'm not sure if I've seen this yet, but are there any examples for deploying big workspace apps with Docker? And I think I'll let you go ahead and then I'll.
Yeah, I think I saw a plugin related to that, right? I think I saw one of the community plugins, which I'm not sure whether it was already submitted as a plugin or it was just like a package that works with NX. NX deploy it. I think it's.
If it's not here, it might be this one. Well, that's the deployment to your application provider.
Cloud provider, yeah.
But yeah, I do remember seeing one. At least it was in. Maybe it's still in development right now. Oh, there it is, right there.
Oh yeah.
NX plugin to build Docker images for your affected apps. So yeah, there is a plugin there that you can test out and use for building Docker images from your applications in your workspace. So yeah, go ahead and check that one out there. Like I said, you go to our NX community, nx.dev/NX-community page. Then you'll see the other plugins there. But yeah, there's one, NX Docker there. So your question was already answered. We just had to find it. Which is usually how most of those things go. Okay. Let's see. This is a good question here. I can show this. My Nest.js, or let me step back here. Angular apps built into this no longer require my package.json dependencies. Backend apps require node modules for runtime. How can we best determine what dependencies apps actually need?
So for apps, I'm not sure, because like for apps, when we build them, we don't move over the package JSON. I know, so I don't have a definite answer for that one. One would have to basically copy those over manually. We did that recently, however, for libraries, where we basically, when you create a publisher library and you basically copy that over, then the publisher library has a package JSON in there. And what we did is we basically pre-compile now that package JSON with the dependencies that library needs. And so in theory, what could be done is like do the same, kind of look at that code and do the same for the applications as well, and copy over the package JSON as well there.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I guess it's still a manual process for applications, but at least for libraries, we are like intelligently figuring out which dependencies that library needs and putting those in the package JSON that you distribute. So get some functionality there. Okay, and like I said, we'll plug the NX community plugins again. You can learn how to create a plugin. We have plugin office hours. I think on our alternating weeks that we don't have NX office hours. That way you can, if you're creating a plugin and you need some support, you can, like I said, jump to our Slack channel or our NX plugin office hours to get some firsthand support in creating those plugins. So was there anything else you wanted to? I think we got about 4 minutes left. Was there anything else you wanted to plug or talk about before we wrap up?
I'm pretty good.
Upcoming ideas or things you're diving into?
Let me think about a couple of things. We are currently planning a course for ACAT about NX. So that's about something we work on, which we'll try to push out as soon as we can. Then there's the buildable library thing. The whole, what is pretty new, which many people might not have seen, which kind of works together with that buildable libraries, is the whole possibility that you can now provide that dash with dependencies, with depths. Which will now figure out intelligently which libraries have to be built if you have dependencies between those buildable libraries. So that's a major addition, and that's also something you need definitely for the whole incremental builds, which we talked earlier, right? Because then you would have something like ng build or ng serve that app with dependencies, and then basically would figure out which libraries it had to pull in and build intelligently.
Yeah. Cool. So I'll show this link real quick also. If you want to look at some of the other video tutorials, we have a playlist on YouTube, and I believe this should include the one that you talked about earlier with the library assets there. So be sure to check that one out. And our YouTube, of course, you should be able to find our YouTube channel pretty easily there. And of course, if you have any other questions, for our next NX office hours, feel free to send them to us on Twitter. I'm gonna hide this thing here. You can see our names up here, Brandon T. Roberts or Yuri. And let's see, I should have, I'm gonna show this one again. Use the AXNX hashtag there. We also, you should know this already, but in case you're not using NX today, NX DevTools on Twitter, you can follow us there to get more updates about NX and like I said, the things we're doing with the open source project and with our community plugins, and get more information there. So with that, I think we'll call it a wrap, and we'll see y'all next time. See ya.
Cool. Bye.